just check the mic is actually... Ooh. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura and you can find me here on YouTube, Instagram and Ravelry as Penrose Knits. I'm a knitter and aspiring knitwear designer and I live smack bang in the middle of the UK, in the Midlands, with my husband and two little kiddies. This is a special video for you today. I wanted to commemorate the release of my very first garment pattern, which is the Soufflé, which you can see right here. I won't go into too much detail about it because I've been over it already in my podcasts, which you can watch, but it is a mohair t-shirt, knit top down in the round with a very on-trend frill, and it is released today. Well, on the day that I post this video, it's actually Wednesday, 2 days before the release. I'm trying to get ahead of myself, but by the time this video goes live, it will be also live. And if you're watching this video in the first weekend of its release, from the 8th to the 10th of April, you can get 15% off the pattern on Ravelry. It's automatically applied, you don't need a code. Now, I know that everyone can't use Ravelry. I'm not at the point yet where I've got other options available, but trust me, I'm working on it. If you can't use Ravelry, send me an email and I'll see if I can set up a private PayPal sale for you. So, I wanted to do a little video to commemorate, but I podcasted like last week and I didn't have the energy to do a vlog today, so I thought I'll do a knit and chat. I really like watching them because you can kind of like listen to them even if you're not actually watching the screen. It's just like kind of like chatting about knitting with a friend, and who doesn't love chatting about knitting with a friend? But I wanted to focus, so I decided to do unpopular knitting opinions. I did this on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago and it was so fun. So I put up a little question box this morning and said, tell me your unpopular opinions, and I'm going to chat about them today. But first I'll show you what I'm working on. If you watch the latest podcast, you might recognise this. I am working on, oh gosh, I'm in a tangle. God. The joys of working with two strands. Here we go. I am working on the Summer Soufflé, which is the next version of the original Soufflé, but this is designed to be made with with solid yarn. So I'm using the Knitting for Olive cotton merino, which is a 4-ply, but I'm holding it double to create a DK, so you could use a single strand of DK or 2 strands of fingering, and this is 70% cotton and 30% wool, so my kind of thing. I'm not so keen on 100% cotton myself, but that little touch of wool just makes it a little bit more wearable, I think. I am just about to do the ribbing on the body, which means I'm nearly done, though I am going to add a little bit of length to the sleeves because I was trying it on the other day and it just felt a little bit uncomfortable where it was sitting, so I'm going to add another inch, but it's nearly done. How exciting! It's just started absolutely tipping it down, so you may be able to hear the rain. I've had to sit a little bit closer to my window today because it is gloomy. Oh my gosh. We have got a wooden, very poorly insulated roof, so soz if you can hear the rain. But anyway, let's get into it. Now, I've already had a little look through the responses and there are quite a few common ones and repeated ones. Some that I agree with, some that I don't. Oh my god, I've got myself a real knot right here. What the heck? Oh my gosh, who's texting me? Right, so the very first one I had is, I love knitting twisted rib, and soz, but I don't agree with you. I find working twisted rib really laborious, but then I also really like knitting just traditional 1x1 rib, but some people find that really laborious. And that takes us on to another really common one, which I do agree with. Oh my gosh. I hope I don't have to do the school run in this weather. Right, I think I'm just gonna have to crack on because I don't think this is gonna pass anytime soon. This one's great because it's just twisted rib being sick emoji, like green face emoji. And there are a few other ones, and I'm afraid I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of the way twisted rib looks. I find that when you've got like a whole project that's stockinette, like a whole body and everything, and then you get a twisted rib like collar or edging, I just find it's quite harsh and they don't necessarily kind of transition well or marry that well together. Whereas when you've got twisted rib on like something lacy, or twisted rib within lace can be amazing. So I definitely think there's a place for it, but overall I'm not the biggest fan of twisted rib and I really don't like working it, so why would I do it? And there's another one, another similar one to that actually, which I'll bring in now, and that is, I think rolled hems look awful. They seem to be fairly popular, question mark, exclamation mark, question mark, explanation mark. Again, rolled hems are not to my taste. I find they make the garment look a little unfinished, and in that respect I feel the same about reverse stockinette. It feels like a jumper that's inside out, and it just doesn't, my brain doesn't like it. So I kind of agree with the rolled hem, but then I kind of think both of the things, like twisted rib, rolled hems, reverse stockinette, it's all down to personal taste, and personal taste is never wrong or incorrect, in my opinion. Next up we have, I really don't like the super chunky yarn jumpers slash cardies or massive balloon sleeves. Now, for someone who's currently got a super chunky balloon sleeve jumper in the testing process, I'm gonna have to say I don't agree. However, I also kind of do agree. I find jumpers with the like super bulky yarn that's like 10mm needles and above, and it's that solid, heavy merino chunky, I don't think I could personally wear it. I think they look and feel heavy, but again, personal taste. The line for me, personally, is around 8mm needles, and I much prefer chunky yarn that is blown. So, Sandnes Garn Cos, or Drops Air, Drops Wish, or Knitting for Olive double soft merino, but that's discontinued now. There's loads of different like blown yarns, and I just find they create a much lighter, much more wearable garment. But again, I'm not really one to venture much beyond 8mm needles. I kind of like normal chunky, like 6 to 7mm needles. I think that can still look really, really light, and it's really satisfying because they knit up really, really quickly. But again, I think finding the right, I've already gone wrong. This was a bad idea. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've gone really wrong. I really think that finding the right kind of yarn is what can make a bulky weight garment really successful. And when it comes to balloon sleeves, again, do you know what? Before the chunky souffle, I never had been drawn to doing balloon sleeves. One, because they look like a lot of extra work, and two, because I thought they were a little bit impractical. But I actually really enjoy wearing my balloon sleeve, and I feel like it's a quite simple and easy way to have a bit of a statement, like a design statement. Physically wearing a balloon sleeve, I find it like really cozy and comforting, and it's just the right kind of level of design feature that I'm comfortable wearing. A lot of the time I'm very much, I don't want to draw any attention to myself, give me the plainest, most simplest, softest clothing ever, like give me black and grey and white, don't look at me. Sometimes I'm like, look at my giant balloon sleeve and my ruffle. It all depends what kind of mood I'm in. So I think, yeah, I understand why balloon sleeves aren't for everyone, but personally, I'm here for it. So next up we have, it's fine to knit with acrylic. And yes, I think this is quite a common, it's quite a common opinion that acrylic is bad. And I understand how environmentally it can be bad, but I also think it can be quite elitist to assume that everybody can afford 100% wool. I think natural fibres are becoming a lot more accessible with Drops and even Filcolana, but again, we're not too sure on the environmental standards of those brands. But I think overall, acrylic has got its place just like any other fibre. I personally don't knit with acrylic because of its properties in that it can grow a lot. Like, I don't want to put the time and effort into a jumper for it to then grow 3 sizes after a couple of washes, which has happened to me more than once. However, I do understand that it's a lot more affordable, so you can get more garments out of it. But I think overall, if you were to spend, say, if you were to buy 3 sweater quantities worth of acrylic and get 3 sweaters, however, those sweaters are only going to be wearable for quite a short amount of time. I think it's more, I think you're going to get more for your money by buying maybe 1 or 2 sweater quantities worth of a yarn like wool, of a fibre like wool, that the garments you make with it are going to be wearable for a lot longer, years, generations in some cases. So I think, obviously I think it's a matter of personal taste, accessibility, affordability, but yes, I agree. It's absolutely fine to knit with acrylic if that's what works for you. And there's also quite a lot of really good acrylic and natural fibre blends out there. I think Wool Ease is one of them. But yeah, you can get lots of acrylic and wool and acrylic and alpaca blends, which, you know, kind of bridge the gap and have that kind of like happy medium. So moving on. Another chunky garments are sometimes overrated, just like mohair. And yes, there are a few. I really don't like mohair, not the biggest fan of mohair. And yeah, I see why. Lovely Ruth from Ruth Loves to Knit has often mentioned about her flashbacks of the 80s and how mohair is just not an option for her. And I totally get that, because I see all the 90s trends coming back in and I'm just like, no, I can't. Bucket hats, I don't get it. I don't get bucket hats. So I totally get why in that respect mohair isn't for everyone. Also, obviously physically not everyone can wear mohair, but some people just aren't that into the fluff of it, which I think is totally fine. I think alpaca is a really nice alternative to mohair if you do want some form of halo but you don't want the kind of overall fuzz. And you can get some really nice non-mohair wools that just have a little bit more of a fuzziness to them, but without being actual mohair. Next up, what have we got? I've scrolled too far. Magic loop method is not worthwhile on most projects. Slow, leaves ladders, and DPNs are just better. Don't agree. So I'm a magic loop advocate, but that's the first thing I learned. It's where I started. And now when I knit magic loop, I don't get ladders and I don't find it slow. I find it quite intuitive, like the pulling through of the needles. And I actually find the reverse with DPNs. I find them fiddly, I find they get in the way, I find they leave ladders. You've actually got like 4 or 5 opportunities for ladders, whereas just like the 2 with magic loop. And also DPNs are basically little death sticks, and I have 2 small children, so it's not practical for me to work with DPNs. So it's funny because we're like the complete opposite. I think DPNs are like, why would you when you could do it with one thing? But everybody has their own preferences. Funny, isn't it? I think maybe if I'd learnt on DPNs, I might be like, yeah, DPNs, no magic loop. So I guess it just depends what you're used to. Mistakes in knitting add character. I think it depends on the mistake. I think if you've got like a great big error right in the front, it probably wouldn't be characterful. It would just look a bit odd. But I think quite often when there are mistakes that kind of blend in and you know that they're there, it can make the garment even more personal. For example, my novice sweater that I spoke about in my 2021 knits video, the sleeves are a slightly different colour to the body, which is a, you know, pretty big mistake, but I think it looks cool and it's got character and it's unique. Don't wear it that often, but I shan't ever get rid of it. So yeah, I guess I do agree, mistakes in knitting can add character, but not necessarily all the time. Next up, oh, controversial. I dislike petite knit patterns. I like petite knit patterns. Don't like all of them, but in general, yeah, I think there's quite a lot in there. I think she's got a really modern design aesthetic. I'm not so keen on the oversized thing all the time. I think that's quite oversized, can only really work for certain body types, and it's not always taken into consideration when grading for larger sizes. But then in the end, like gauge and size, that's up to the knitter. Like, you don't have to do it at the ease that is recommended. You can do it whatever ease you like. But yeah, overall I do like petite knit. I really like, I'm still working on my September sweater, and that's probably going to be in hibernation until the autumn now. But I really love my Friday slipover, and I would like to do quite a few more of her patterns in the future when I'm not so focused on my own designs. But yeah, sorry darling, don't agree with you. But I love you. Ooh, next up, I don't like numbers instead of proper pattern names. Sweater number 11, 18, camisole number 4, and so on. I kind of agree with this one. I've never knit my favourite things knitwear pattern. and I think they're really nice designs. I've just never been drawn to making one, but I do find it confusing when people are like sweater number this, sweater number that, and I'm like, I do not know which one you mean. But I think that's just because I've not knit any of the patterns before. I think if you really like a design, the name of it, whether it's a name or a number, will get into your head eventually. But I do think it is easier to kind of remember actual words that describe the pattern or that are inspired, the pattern's inspired by, that kind of thing. So yeah, kind of agree, but in the end, I think if you love a pattern enough, you'll probably remember the name of it. Right, next up, swatching is important and fun, but people telling others they have to do it are annoying. Yeah, I think it's annoying when anybody ever tells somebody else that they have to do something when it's based on an opinion. It's like, come on guys, we've all got, we are all our own people, we can make our own decisions. The only time that is not the case is in a test knit. You absolutely must swatch for a test knit, because the main reason of a test knit is to kind of check yardage, sizing, fit, and if you've not got the same gauge as is recommended, then you're not really fulfilling your role as a test knitter. And I think it also kind of depends on the pattern, really. Like, I think for most garments I will swatch, mainly so that I know I'm getting the right fit, but also to check if I like the fabric or not. Quite often I'll knit up a swatch and I'm like, no, I'm not so keen on this actually. I think I might use a different yarn or a different colour. For example, I wanted to make my daughter a September sweater and I thought I had the perfect yarn for it, swatched, and it was awful. I hated it. Obviously the worst that can happen is you have to rip back your work if you realise it's not working whilst making the garment, which, I mean, I'm not adverse to ripping back. I'm a designer, I'm used to it. Or you get a garment that doesn't fit you, and if you are like a prolific knitter and you make a lot of things and you don't mind giving it away or donating it or selling it, then again, totally fine. But I think if you really want to make sure that what you're going to finish with is what you want, it's a good idea to swatch. But if you don't want to, that's fine. Apart from in a test knit, always swatch in a test knit. And from the same lovely person, sustainability is important, but creativity and having fun with knitting comes first. I think that depends on kind of personal situation. I think it's really important that we keep in mind sustainability and that every person can do what they can, and that's going to vary between people. Like, I'm in a position where I can afford to buy more sustainable yarn, so I will. But I think if you're not in that position, then that shouldn't stop you from knitting, because everybody deserves this craft. And being able to have fun with it and experiment with it, yeah, is important to the person. And I think choosing sustainable yarns within knitting isn't the only way that we can be more sustainable, you know? Buy less plastic, use less plastic, recycle whenever you can, walk instead of drive, etc. So yes, I do agree with you on that. Oh, another swatchy one. I can never be bothered to swatch, I just live dangerously. Fair play to you. If it gives you a thrill, then who cares? Another one saying, I love using DPNs. Don't agree with you, they are devil sticks. So my next unpopular knitting opinion is the concept of selfish knitting and some extra bulky style knits. We've covered the bulky style knits. And yes, the concept of selfish knitting. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because, I mean, if you've seen episode 1 of the Knitting Pickle podcast back in April 2021, I say this is my year of selfish knitting. And I think at the time it was just a term that I'd kind of heard and like recognised. And I think the term selfish knitting in itself is now a little bit problematic. There is absolutely nothing selfish about knitting for yourself and knitting for yourself only. It's your craft and it's for you. So yes, I agree that the term selfish knitting is kind of, yeah, should be updated. Next up, I don't like how tubular bind off looks. Don't agree. I love it. I think it looks wicked. I think it can really make that ribbing edge look really smooth and professional and defined and just really, really yummy. But at the same time, I think a traditional bind off also looks great. And do you know what, I was talking to my friend Caroline about this the other day. I don't like the way 2x2 tubular bind off looks, and what you basically have to do with that is because you've got 2 knits, 2 purls, you basically cable and swap one of the knits with one of the purls, so you've got knit purl, and then you do a 1x1 tubular bind off. And I'm not so keen on that. I think that kind of makes the end of it look a little bit messy, and I would rather do like a traditional bind off in patterns, so you knit the knits and purl the purls, because that kind of cast off edge kind of ends up being underneath the sweater anyway, rather than being like, you know, when you cast off traditionally with stockinette and that kind of, it kind of comes to the front, that cast off edge, bind off edge. When it's in 2x2, it kind of sits underneath, and I think it's absolutely fine. But I do prefer the look of 1x1 tubular bind off at all times, as you can see here actually. Yeah, I really like it. Soz. This next one made me laugh. Shawls are useless. Giggly emoji. I don't think they're useless, because obviously lots of people get lots of uses out of them. But I personally don't think I'm one of those people that would get a lot of uses out of a shawl. Never say never. And I think when I ever knit or make a shawl, I will find uses for it. I'd probably wear it more as a scarf in the winter with a coat. But I'm not the kind of person that would just like wear a shawl as part of an outfit. That's not really my kind of thing. Though for someone who loves just to be constantly surrounded by softness and warmness, maybe I should make myself a shawl. I don't like sweater number 18. I love structured patterns, but it seems really random. Much prefer Turney. Turney is a new design by the Knit Pearl girl. She's just released her slipover version and she's working on the sweater version. So structured patterns, structured knitting, structured patterns, if you're not familiar with it, is that kind of like textural, what's the word? When you design buildings, architectural, structured kind of thing. So the sweater number 18, I believe, is my favourite things knitwear one, where it's like stockinette, garter, 1x1, and it's all kind of mixed up. I believe Rebecca from the Crea Bayer has just finished one, if you want to hear more about that design. But it definitely is a little bit more random and all over the shop. I mean, I don't find it offensive. I don't think I'm going to knit it, but I think it's fine. But the Turney by the Knit Pearl girl is kind of a little bit more stripped back. It's like garter, 1x1 stockinette, garter, 1x1 stockinette. So it's a little easier to kind of take in. It's a little bit less, which I definitely prefer as a person, but again, that's a personal one. So yeah, I think I agree with you on that one, but again, it's a matter of taste. What have we got next? I don't get the knitted bralette hype. So I have never finished a knitted bralette. I have made but not quite finished the My Summer Secret crop by Jessie made, and that's one that's like 3x3 rib, and it's more of a crop top in that it's got a little bit more length from the underbust, but it's kind of still got a kind of underweary vibe. I've never made an actual bralette, which is more like a bra that's just to cover the boobs, but I would be interested in making one. I am a small chested person. I don't really wear bras unless I really, really have to. I wear like bralettes, crop tops, stretchy things. Obviously that's not possible for everybody. A lot of people need a little bit more support than that. So I probably would get on with a knitted bralette, especially kind of like at home, under knitwear. I get why that wouldn't necessarily be everybody's thing. Apologies, I ran out of battery, so I'm not sure where I left off. The last one that I was reading was too many patterns with yarn combinations, mohair plus something else, for example. That does seem to be a popular thing at the moment. I really like combining yarns. I feel like you can make a really unique garment depending on what you combine, but it can also be frustrating because it can be difficult to figure out how to substitute that with one strand. And I think I'm only just getting my head around that. But again, swatching can be your friend there. So say you've got a pattern that's this 4-ply held with this mohair, and you know that that would roughly equate to like either like a heavy sport or a light DK, depending on your gauge. I'd probably start by just being like, okay, well, let's start with the DK, let's get the recommended needles, do a little swatch, see what I get. If I meet gauge, then brilliant, I know that I can swap out those yarn combinations and just use one single yarn. But if you're like a reasonably new knitter, that can be a little bit intimidating for sure. The next one, I don't understand. It just says home knitting is for oldies. I don't really know. Oh God, the sun's come out. I don't know what home knitting is. Am I home knitting right now? Or is it like knitting homeware, like cushions and like blankets and stuff? I have no idea what that means. If I'm a home knitter, then I guess I'm an oldie, and I'm fine with that. Okay, so next up we've also got a magic loop hater, but they also say I hate knitting with blown yarns, which I find way too elastic. Really interesting. I've not had that issue with blown yarns, and it could be that maybe you're changing your needle size might help with that a little bit. So the chunky soufflé is made with Drops Air, which is a blown yarn, but the recommended needle size for that yarn is 10mm. The chunky soufflé recommends 8mm, so it's actually going down quite a few needle sizes that are recommended for that yarn. And what that does, it makes a slightly firmer fabric, and therefore you kind of, because you're knitting it tighter, you're reducing a little bit of that. Oh, have we gone all dark again now? That's better. You're reducing that stretch. So if you've got like some blown yarn left in your stash and you're like, I don't like this, don't know what to do with it, try knitting with it on a smaller needle and see how you get on. Most of chunky knits are unflattering. I think it depends on what your version of flattering is. I think a lot of the time when people say flattering, what they actually mean is slimming, which I think is problematic because clothing doesn't have to make you look slim to look good, in my opinion. But again, that's just my opinion. Non-superwash merino is hard to find in the similar price. I'm not sure on this one. I've been working with the Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino recently, which is a non-superwash merino, and I assume that their normal merino is, yeah, it's definitely not. So Knitting for Olive is non-superwash merino as far as I'm aware, but again, that price point is quite, it's not, I don't think it's super high, but it's definitely a step above. Cascade do non-superwash wool, the 220, they do a superwash version and a non-superwash version. I don't think it's merino, but when I've used it, the 220 non-superwash wool is really nice and soft. It's not scratchy for me, might be for you, but not for me. So and it's a really, really good price point. So if you haven't checked that out, check that out. But I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not because I've not researched it enough. Right, it doesn't matter how you knit. Looking at the you should only knit continental so quick, folks. Totally agree with this one. It does not matter how you knit. I am an English knitter and I am a fast knitter. I can knit continental but only really knit continental. I have no time for continental purling because I think that is slower than my English purling, in my opinion. But obviously it depends how you purl. There's loads of ways to continental purl. But I think just because there may be a knitting style which means you could knit faster doesn't mean that you should. For a lot of people, knitting isn't about getting as many things finished as you can. It's about the joy of doing it. And a lot of the time, I think knitting forces us to slow down, to be more mindful, to like enjoy our craft and to kind of have a break from the fastness of life. So there's absolutely no reason why you should speed up just because it's an option. Also, I can't be bothered to effectively start from scratch. Like, there have been a few times where I thought, okay, well maybe I'll practice my continental knitting here, and I'm like, this is too slow for me, I cannot be bothered. I'm not a new knitter anymore, I'm just going to stick to what I know. I'm a big advocate for English knitting. I love it. My knits and purls are extremely similar in the way that they're done, so I use pretty much the same amount of yarn for my knits and my purls, which means I have never rowed out. I know it's not the same for everyone, but you're a lot less likely to have rowing out. That's when you're knitting flat and you kind of get this ziggy zaggy look, because usually your pearls are you're working your pearls tighter or your knits looser, and it creates this thing. So I don't get that with the way I knit, and I knit English. Right, next up we have single ply yarn is awful. It's splitty, tears, rips easily, and is a nightmare to mend. Hard pass. So my experience of single ply yarn, I used the Hedgehog Fibres skinny singles, but I held that with their alpaca boucle, and so by holding that single strand with another solid strand, it kind of gets rid of a lot of the issues. The other single ply yarn I've used is the West Yorkshire Spinners Retreat, which I use for my Chunky Dahlia, and though I didn't find it hard to work with at all, it is pilling like crazy because of the nature of its unpliedness. Single ply yarn still tends to have twist in it, but when you say splitty, tears, rips easily is a nightmare to mend, that sounds a little bit more like unspun / roving yarn, like Plotalopi, Newtodon, that kind of thing. And yeah, they do have those issues. I've never found it splitty, but it does tear and rip easily. That's the nature of holding it on its own, so I probably would either hold it double or hold it with another strand. But yeah, it's definitely not as easy to knit with as other things, and if that's not your cup of tea, then don't drink that cup of tea. Oh, the next one is controversial. Most Colorwork sweaters fall into the ugly sweater category. Oh God, I've forgotten to purl again. It's because I was talking about continental knitting. Blimey, what do I think when I think ugly sweater? I mean, I think I tend to think 80s. So the only kind of Colorwork garment that I've made in that kind of traditional Colorwork style is my Mohair cardigan by Helen Magnusson, and I've covered this in my 2021 review, but I don't wear it that often, and when I do wear it, it's because of the qualities of the yarn, like super warm, because I used Letlopi, not so much for the design. And I don't really have any urges to make anything like that, like traditional Colorwork sweaters again. But again, that's just because of my style. I can find them a little bit overwhelming. I prefer solid, I prefer plain, but completely depends on my mood. Very similar to like balloon sleeves or big design statements. But I definitely don't think they're ugly. I think it's a matter of taste for sure. I think they are incredible examples of craft, and oh my God, so difficult to design. So another kind of like expression of skill. But I don't think they're ugly. Right, I've got 2 left and then I'm gonna call it a day. And the penultimate unpopular knitting opinion is weave in your ends as you go. So I assume that you don't like weaving in your ends as you go. And I would say I'm in your camp. The only time I have really successfully weaved my ends in as I go, as in like a knitted method, is the Weave and Steven, and I've only done that in the shawlography, and the shawlography is obviously this crazy, busy, textural, colourful thing, and you cannot see where those ends have been weaved in. Whereas on something like this, if I do Weave and Steven, like a weave in as I go method, you can see it. I really find like it shows up more than if I just join my yarn, tie it in a quick knot, and then weave it in at the end. I feel I can do a much neater, less obvious job of weaving in. Now, if you mean weaving in your ends as you go, as in like I've got an end, I'm then gonna get my embroidery needle and weave it in, I kind of do a bit of both. I tend to weave in at the end of every section. So if I finish a sleeve, I'll weave in the ends on the sleeve. If I finish the body, I'll weave in the ends on the body. Or if I'm like changing yarns quite a lot, I'll do a little bit as I go. But I've also found that as I am designing, you're much more likely to have to rip back. So I choose not to weave in my ends as I go because I never know if I'm going to need to rip back or not. Also, I think it was the latest episode of Andrea Mowry's podcast when she was talking about how it's always best to kind of not snip your ends or weave in your ends until you have washed and blocked and really tried on your garment and given it a wear, because if you find you're not so keen on the finished garment that you've got, it's going to be much easier to rip back and repurpose that yarn if your ends aren't weaved in. So yeah, I think each to their own, but I think there's also a lot of reasons why it's probably best not to weave in your ends as you go practically. But if you know that you love that item and you're going to wear it and you're never going to rip it back and you've got a lot of ends to weave in, it can also, oh my god, I've done it again. Oh my gosh, I'm automatically going stockinette. This was the wrong thing to choose. I haven't even completed one round and I've done it wrong. So maybe knit and chat is probably best for stockinette. The last unpopular knitting opinion I have for you is knitting flat. I hate it. Totally get this one. I am not that into knitting a whole garment in flat pieces and then seaming it together, though I don't actually mind seaming. I just find it quicker to knit it in one piece if I can. But I don't personally dislike the act of knitting flat. I don't mind a little bit of purling. I really like the construction where you have top down and you knit the back piece first up into underarm, and then you knit the front panel flat, the other front panel flat, and join them, and then knit the rest in the round. I really like that construction. I think it gives you a lot of leeway when it comes to designing. The chantilly design, so the cardigan and the vest, are both done that way, so you do have a little bit of knitting flat. But it took me quite a long time as a knitter to get to the point where I didn't mind that purling. So I will make a cardigan and do the purling and be absolutely fine with it. But it's definitely taken, I think, a lot of purling to get to the point where I don't mind purling. It does feel like more like monotonous and more time consuming than the knit stitch, but I think it just comes with practice as well. But again, you could be really good at purling and still hate purling. So I'll say it one more time, each to their own. So I hope you enjoyed this little extra video for you. Let me know your unpopular knitting opinions in the comments, because I can't get enough of it. And maybe I'll do another one in the future based on your comments. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again soon. I think my next video, I think it'll probably be a vlog. I've not done a vlog for a little while. Next time I've got a quiet day at home, or if not, I will see you for the next episode of the Knitting Pajamas podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your support, especially when it comes to the souffle. It has been 3 months of really, really hard work and a lot of anxiety, some tears, a lot of happy tears, and I can't believe it's happened. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.